Welcome back to another episode of the Amateur Hour podcast. It's just Jacob today, myself, working on this podcast, and I'm going to be answering the question of why Tottenham are failing currently and why did it lead to Pochettino being sacked, because his stint with Tottenham was so successful. He completely changed the culture and dynamic of the club. He created a winning culture, not just a team with aspirations of being in the Champions League, but made it a reality of continuous qualification for the Champions League, and even got to the Champions League final last year. But how did it all go so wrong to the point where they fired Pochettino merely a few months after the Champions League successes that they had, getting to the final, but unfortunately for them, not quite doing it. Didn't play well in the final. But right now they are 14th in the league, in the Premier League, not doing well at all. And Pochettino, like I said, got to the Champions League final, and in the summer was linked with the likes of Real Madrid and Manchester United, obviously one being a little more fruitful than the other, being Real Madrid, but decided, his future's with Tottenham, and, well, right now, winless in the last 5 Premier League games, winless in the last 12 Premier League away games, and they have the most losses in the Premier League in 2019 with 18 losses. It is by no means just this season that's the problem for Pochettino. Near the end of last season, it was a really, really poor spell of form for Tottenham to end the Premier League last season. However, they still managed to finish 4th in the league. But right now, they are the only team in the bottom half of the Premier League with a positive goal difference, which is quite astonishing when you look at teams like Arsenal, who are 6th in the league, yet they have a negative goal difference. I find that truly hard to believe that Spurs are in 14th, the only team 10th and under with a positive goal difference of +1, 18 goals for and 17 against. But they're 5th in goals scored at 18, like I said, and 9th in goals against. So for a team with great aspirations of maybe even challenging the leaders in the Premier League, it is definitely not what they want to see in terms of goals against. The goals for isn't that bad, but they're on pace to score 48 goals this season. And last season, they scored 67, where they were 4th in the league in that regard. And they're also on pace to concede 46 goals this season, and last year, they only conceded 39. So the defense isn't as big of a problem as the offensive statistics. However, there is still reason to be alarmed by the defensive number going up, being 9th in the league. What happens with Tottenham is that they only really play in close games. Of their 14 Premier League games, of their 12 Premier League games so far this season, they have only had 3 games in which they have, in where it's been decided by more than 1 goal. So they had a 3-1 win over Aston Villa, a 4-0 win over Crystal Palace, and a 3-0 loss to Brighton. Pretty embarrassing, that game right after the 7-2 loss to Bayern in the Champions League. But in the Premier League, only 3 games have been decided by more than a goal. And this was a trend that they had last season, but being in close games. But they only have 1 clean sheet in those 12 games. And last year they were 5th in the league in that regard, was 13 clean sheets. So they, like I said, they managed to have really close games. And last year they only had 2 draws all season, which was first in the Premier League in terms of amount of draws. And right now they're 2nd in the league in terms of the amount of draws that they've had. They have the 2nd most in the Premier League, which complete change of dynamic. But because they played in so many close games, the difference last year was near the end of games, they would really, really push to get that goal to win the game. And at the start of the season, the first half, it came out really well. Like, they would start winning these games. Like, all these games they were tied, they would go for it. That's the reason they didn't tie games. They would always go for these close games. But near the end of the season, it turned into more so that teams were kind of figuring them out in that sense. And they started conceding more late goals, which led to poor results. And I think what happened was this season, Pochettino kind of became more aware of that trend. So instead of really going for these games late, they tend to more so not quite sit back. They do still push for the win, especially against lower teams, but it's more so that he's not going for it as much because it really wasn't working at the end of last season. He hasn't really figured out, well, he won't get the chance, but he did not figure out how to get those wins in those close games like he did last year. For goals, Son and Kane are doing fine. Kane has 6 goals. Son has 3 goals, and that's 9 out of the 18 of the team. So 50% of the goal output coming from those two. Not a huge problem because those are your 2 top goal scorers, but if they're only half the goals are coming from somewhere else, then that is a bit of a situation to look at. But last season, they scored 29 of the Spurs' 67 apparently, which is 43%. So not too big of a problem in terms of the stars who are supposed to be scoring their output. But what I think the problem is there's a lack of creativity in midfield. And I think the midfield is where the problem is for Tottenham. There's been continuous poor performances from Eriksen and Dele Alli, specifically Eriksen. He's been pretty poor since the start of the season and near the end of last season. I think it has a lot to do with the links that he's had abroad to different teams like Real Madrid. And I think, it seemed like in the summer that he wanted to go somewhere else, but Spurs were not keen on selling him. So I think that's in the back of his mind a little bit this season, and it's causing him to underperform heavily. And he's the creative mind that they have in the midfield, the guy that's going to change a game for them, especially in those close games that they don't have this year. And the other midfielders aren't offering much creativity, like the likes of Moussa Sissoko. He's 6th in the league in backward passes, so not a lot of positive output coming out of Moussa Sissoko. And in terms of assists, only Heung-min Son has more than 1 for Tottenham. But the most illuminating stats about why Tottenham is failing comes from the entire team's stats, the collective. They are 10th in the league in shots. So, again, a team that's supposed to be free-flowing on offense, supposed to be scoring a ton of goals, that is not the case with this. They only have 10 shots, and they only have 9 big chances missed, which is 19th in the Premier League in that number. So it means it's the second best in that number. Only one team has missed less big chances than Tottenham. They've only missed 9. And put that in perspective, Tammy Abraham and Chris Wood, Tammy Abraham of Chelsea, Chris Wood of Burnley, have missed 9 by themselves. But Tottenham have only missed 9 as a whole team. The biggest thing is they've been dispossessed more than any team in the Premier League with 158 times. That the most in the Premier League. And that boils down to the midfield creativity that I was just previously alluding to. There's no creativity and there's no positivity in possession. What this leads to is a lot of defensive pressure. And it's just a constant bombardment of the opposition attacking. And it's easy to defend when you don't have to constantly think about doing it. I can speak from experience as a player. It just constant bombardment of attacks wears you down to the point where maybe a little mistake, a little lapse of focus can happen. But if you keep the ball a little bit better, you don't give it away as much, and you focus more on your offense as opposed to playing defense, there's less stress on the defense, and they can be more tuned in and more focused on those if you minimize the amount of attacks that they have to face. Spurs are also 5th in the league in total passes. So there's a lot of questions about being positive in possession, and the constant relentless pressure that the backline face is the problem because they're conceding too many goals and they're not putting enough going forward. So I think the problem really comes down to the midfield. Keeping the ball in midfield, obviously other players can move the ball, but midfield not creative enough because not enough assists are happening for the team, especially in midfield. Like I said, only Heung-min Son has more than 1 assist. He has 3. But they're constantly under pressure at the back, and they're not building up their attacks well enough. They're only 10th in the league in shots, even though and they're second best in terms of big chances missed because they've only missed 9. So they don't generate enough on offense because they're dispossessed so much, and there's a relentless amount of pressure on their back line because of how much they give the ball away. So what needs to happen is, what Pochettino should have corrected with, there's not much he could have done. It's personnel that he had issues with, and he couldn't get the best out of Eriksen. He couldn't get the best out of Dele Alli, and I feel Giovanni Lo Celso, one of their signings in the summer, was not given much of an opportunity under Pochettino, and I think he should have been given even more because he was a pretty prolific midfielder last season for Real Betis. The Ndombele signing, as though it was a good signing, he didn't really add to the creativity in midfield. He's more of a bolstering, screens the back line kind of player. He's not much of an offensive threat. So, unfortunately for Pochettino, he couldn't get the most out of the personnel that he has, and that's ultimately why Tottenham failed. The giveaways and the constant pressure on the back line and not generating enough chances, because there's too many close games where, they have a ton of the ball, but they aren't creating those chances to get the goals. And that sums up Tottenham for the last little while. That sums them up this season. This is why they're not succeeding. And in terms of successing Pochettino, I think there is no better man for the job than Jose Mourinho. He's been linked with him. They've been linked with him today, right after the news happened that Pochettino got fired. They were linked immediately with Jose Mourinho. He's favored to get the job, but I think Mourinho is the best man for this job. As far as the defensive pressure go that I was alluding to, I think this is what Jose Mourinho thrives off of. If Mourinho's there, Tottenham can suck up all that extra pressure, turn it into counterattacks with their electric players like Heung-min Son to spark the counterattack. I think he'll use more of Giovanni Lo Celso. I think it's a player that fits the Mourinho philosophy. He likes having those attacking midfielders, those number 10s, who can act as more so a 9.5 in attack, where they can be just shadowing the striker getting forward, and where they can be a bit of like an 8.5 in terms of defending. So even though they're an attack-minded midfielder, they can come back and help on defense. Obviously, defense-minded tactics that Mourinho has. Also, Mourinho really thrives with hold-up strikers and poachers like Harry Kane, because Mourinho's had success. His most successful stints have been with Didier Drogba, Diego Milito, Karim Benzema, Diego Costa, and Zlatan Ibrahimovic. These are all very similar in terms of they're hold-up strikers, they're good at ball playing, and they're poachers. They get in the box and they score goals. And I think Harry Kane fits that sort of play style that Mourinho loves to have from his strikers, because the most success Mourinho's had is with strikers like Harry Kane. I think Mourinho is the man for the job. I think Tottenham should hire him. I think he'll steady the ship. He'll give you, there's obviously questions about the third season syndrome, but if you want to steady the ship right now and get back on track, Jose Mourinho is your guy. I think he can do wonders with the squad that Tottenham have right now, and that I think Daniel Levy needs to get him on the phone, get him hired. But that'll wrap up this episode. Just to sum it up, Tottenham just need to work on possession, keeping the ball, and being positive in possession. And I think they got to hire Jose Mourinho. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Amateur Hour podcast. If you have any comments on this topic, if you think there's another manager for the job, you can let us know. Let me know at AmateurPDC, Twitter and Instagram. And we'll see you again soon for some more daily content.